welcome to this week's super silky, super sexy episode of the Imaginary Movie Podcast, a podcast where we light up a cigarette, we start calling women doll unaccountably, we speak in 1930s riddles that no one could possibly understand or follow, but sound somewhat cool and standoffish.
Yeah,
and
then we all take off our clothes
as fuck.
unaccountably, because it's a 70s movie, and that's what we're doing apparently. That's
right. My name's David.
what we're doing. Hi David. Hi, this is the podcast. My name's Sam.
What's your name, stranger?
Yeah, on this podcast, where I'm called Sam, we watch a grimy 70s movie that Dave forces us to, and it's an interesting vibe. It's an interesting vibe.
I push back on the Dave forced you to. I gave you an out. I gave you the card. I handed you the card that said we can pull the eject cord on this film.
But then, would we have an opportunity to play such interesting, smooth? Look at this music coming back in. It's getting sinister now.
Yeah, they've adapted like 10 of Raymond Chandler's books, Sam. We could have watched any of those films. There's a really recent one starring famed racist Liam Neeson that's supposed to be absolutely dreadful. Like, unwatchably dreadful.
That sounds great. So, we watched 1979's 1973's The Long Goodbye. Very dramatic music surges up. And I think this is a Robert Altman movie. It stars...
It is a Robert Altman movie. It stars Elliot Gould.
And it's a
That's
screenplay.
right, it's Ross and Monica's dad from Friends.
Exactly. It's the guy. It's the guy from
who's
Ocean's
unaccountably
11.
never on a Star Trek.
Really?
I believe that. Yeah, I was looking through his filmography. I was like, this guy must have been on an episode of Star Trek.
I think he's too high caliber. He's doing movies in the 70s, which means like we're not into the TNG.
He's an actual actor. I think that's the difference, really. Like, he's an actual movie actor who took a recurring role on Friends, presumably to put his grandkids through college. Like, but yeah, I mean, this movie's... I hadn't seen this before, obviously.
No, I hadn't either, and I think I was kind of happy with that. I was kind of happy with that position before.
Don't undermine the very nature of the podcast. Can we save our vitriol for the end, and we'll maybe just like try and be a bit more clinical, have a discussion about this movie?
Yes.
You're going to push back and tell me to shut the fuck up right now. I can see it on your face.
No.
I can see the bile coming up to the surface, Sam.
This is one of those interesting movies in that it's a.
When Sam uses the word interesting this much, it means he thought it was shite.
Raymond Chandler, who kind of did lots of detective fiction-y novels.
Do you want me to talk about Raymond Chandler, Sam?
Yes, I would like to, because this comes from the 1953 novel of the same name, and I believe you've read that, Dave.
I have. I am a fan of it.
Tell us about it, Dave.
So, Raymond Chandler wrote these books, the Philip Marlowe books, and they're kind of like the blueprint of the noir detective stories. Like with Chinatown we watched. Like, that character doesn't exist without Philip Marlowe.
Kind of like this type of music. Everyone's smoking. We've got the sexy...
Walks into an office. Say, doll, have you seen the word? And she's like, I beg your pardon, sir. And he's like, yeah, well, he's a cabbage. We'll take a cabbage for a walk down the street. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about, sir. But it doesn't matter because it's the 30s and the white men have just owned the world and they can do what they want. And
Shut up, listen to this.
Exist. We haven't discovered it yet. And everyone's having bourbon for breakfast and then driving around. And it's great because there's lead everywhere in the fuel. lead and nicotine in coating and everything. Everyone is so hopped up all the time that no one makes sense and nobody knows what's going on. And the books all take place in Hollywood, basically. As well, kind of like, so that it's really tied into that kind of golden age of cinema kind of era and starlets and cocaine sex parties, basically. But before.
So this film then, the book sounds interesting, and the book sounds like the type of thing that you would love, and like there's that vibe, that kind of Chinatown-y listen, sweetheart, type of thing, I think is well versed. It's a real kind
I
of.
think I've used that "take a cabbage for a walk" line before.
It's a very good bit. It's a very good bit. I enjoyed that very much. And what's interesting about this movie is it's trying to kind of like transport that and almost add a more in the 70s, a more modern take.
I think it's pushing back on it a lot. Now, obviously, I've read some of the trivia about this, and so The Long Goodbye, the novel, is the longest Philip Marlowe book, and it's probably the most complicated. There's a lot of moving parts in it. It's horribly tropey. This is the one thing to understand about Philip Marlowe as a character. It kind of like, and it didn't even originate a lot of these tropes. It just brought them all together. It's kind of like the source of all the noir tropes that we had in films before this, and even since. And everything you think of, like he's a drunk. He always falls for attractive blonde women. He's never quite right when he's solving a case. He gets beaten up a lot. Like there's a very kind of flawed anti-hero vibe here, and I think this film, and Altman especially, this film is kind of like almost like a refusal of that kind of like tropiness, where they see all of that and they go, no, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna kind of use that to frame the story, a similar-ish story, to frame it and kind of like push back on all the tropes.
And we're going to add a very significant, perhaps you describe as healthy dose of 70s grime, and like the 70s realism that we've talked about many times, in that movies from the 60s still have that kind of James Bondy glow about them and everything's. And then we get into this decade, and it's all Serpico, and it's French Connection, and it's fucking hell, everything's bleak. How did anyone get out of bed in the morning? Because it's the 70s, and there's lead everywhere, like you say. I just...
Well, that's the interesting... Last thing on Roman Chandler, that's the interesting thing, Sam, is the choice to modernise this film, because the novel takes place in the 1930s.
In the 30s, that's right.
And so it's kind of like the choice to, and I love, from a production standpoint, I love I don't want to have to break out the Al Capone costume and sets. Let's just
grab a camera.
It happens in the 1970s, exactly. Like, we can make it a lot cheaper that way if everyone can just wear what they would, wear clothes that we just buy from a shop today.
Yeah.
But I think it does move it a little, because you kind of like put all the 1930s stuff, and we'll get into the plot in a minute, into this movie, and then have it kind of like against this 1970s backdrop, where again, I think quite intentionally, quite a lot of it rings quite false throughout the movie.
I've seen this movie then as we're taking on the tropey noir vibe feel that comes from these novels and the whole kind of type of films. I've seen this movie described as a satire of that in a lot of ways.
It kind of almost is.
I
would argue it doesn't succeed at that for me.
I mean, I'm holding back my negativity, but like the reach that feels like to me to suggest that we're going from a type of movie where if we've got like a Woody Allen type character, or if we've got someone who's kind of who's maybe a little bit less immersed in the story and kind of sits outside of it and gets to view all these things and say, this is a bit weird, then maybe we'd kind of, but I don't get this as a satire at all. I get this as a kind of, as an attempt to modernize, an attempt to maybe point at some of the kind of noir tropes, but I don't feel like it's I don't feel like it's pushing it into a neo-noir in the sense that we're going to kind of reevaluate some of these things. It feels like we're rehashing the type of stuff, but it's just in the 70s now, and everyone's driving boxy cars, and and that's kind of a weird place for this to be. Do you think?
It's a strange sort of movie. What I'd like to do, Sam, is I would like to just tell you the plot of this movie, not because I think you need to hear it, although Also, yes.
Dave, I absolutely need to hear it.
But I just think that this is maybe the sort of movie where, like, you could be forgiven for not understanding any of what happens in the movie. I've read the book, and admittedly, this isn't beat for beat based on the book, but I struggled to follow who was who and what was going on.
Can I? I think I would like to hear a relative, not too long summary of the
short-ish.
film. But what I would say is that I'm 100% with you there. I mean, I didn't have really any idea what was going on. I sat and watched this movie. I just sat and watched it. I wasn't on my flight. I really did try and concentrate because I know a lot of these films is about the experience of the watch. It's about the creativity of the cinematography and the acting. And you need to kind of immerse yourself, I think, in older movies. And because we don't have the same language, like the movie language is different.
So often movies of this era are kind of like, and why I like neo-noir movies generally, so often they're about vibes because so much of the visual language is either brand new because the 70s was such a transformative decade for film. So much of the visual language is so raw and new and unrefined that it's hard as a modern viewer to appreciate it.
Yeah.
And so much of it is predicated on 1960s movies and 1950s movies that we also don't have
and twisting them. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of like,
and yet I had no fucking clue what was going on the entire time. So
in this movie, Elliot Gould plays Philip Marlowe, who's a private detective, right? We meet him. I'm not going to get into that. We can get into some of the other scenes so far. His friend Terry Lennox comes to visit him. He's going away. He wants Marlowe to drive him to the airport. Marlowe drives him to the airport. Marlowe comes back. He gets arrested because the police are looking for Terry Lennox because he allegedly murdered his wife. Marlowe gets put in prison for 3 days or jail for 3 days and then they release him because Terry Lennox has killed himself in this town in Mexico. Marlowe doesn't believe he killed himself or his wife, but he goes back to work. He's hired by this woman called Mrs. Wade to find her husband, who's the author. He finds the husband at this rehab place, basically this dodgy rehab place being run by this quack who was in Star Trek.
Who was he in Star Trek?
He's just some forgettable alien.
No, he's
DS9.
He's. I know that. I know his face.
You look into this while I explain the plot to you.
Yeah.
So he finds the writer. He takes the writer home. He's then sort of in this situation where he gets roughed up or gets approached by this gangster because Terry Lennox has stolen a load of his money. He's kind of involved with the Wades because the husband's quite volatile and suicidal, and the wife wants him around to stop that. That culminates in the writer killing himself. The gangsters kidnap Elliot Gould to get the money back. They find a $5,000 bill that Terry Lennox posted to Marlowe before he died. That again resolves itself fairly perfunctorily, and they get the money back. Marlowe's on the loose. He goes back to the Wade house. They're not there. The movie then ends with, and I'm missing a few bits here, but the important beats. The movie then ends with Marlowe going and finding Lennox and shooting him dead. And then as he's driving away, he drives past Mrs. Wade, who's driving towards where Lennox was. The idea being that Lennox and Mrs. Wade were having an affair. And that's why Lennox murdered his wife, and that's why Wade committed suicide. That's basically the plot. And there's a few key differences. Like I mentioned, it was the longest Raymond Chandler book. And I'm not going to harp on this because I know you haven't read it, but for me, as a fan of the book, the hardest thing about this movie was that it's such a pared down version of that book, which is like a quite overly complex almost. And I think the quote from Altman was like, "Oh, well, you couldn't make that into a movie; it'd be 5 hours long." So this is the version we got, where the gangsters are new and everyone's relationships are kind of like short and pared down.
So we have the Terry plot, who's allegedly killed his wife. We've got Elliot Gould doing his thing. We've got the hospital plot, which is also combined with the writer and the wife. of the writer, who is manic depressive or whatever else, and then we've also got the gangster plot, and like, I think the film is doing too much, and if you talk about this as being like one of the longer books, and actually in the modern era, you'd say this would be a great miniseries. You know, we could spread this out over 10 hours, and it would be an interesting kind of.
It really would be. This book, not I would say a
dive.
lot of Chandler books wouldn't be good miniseries because like some of them are like 150 pages. They're not long books, but The Long Goodbye is like 500 pages, which again isn't a long book, but
But for this
if you're gonna
genre,
tell it-
perhaps, you know,
it's interesting. So in the book, this is boring, but like it's interesting. And just briefly, like the Terry Lennox character, we kind of meet him. So in this movie, we meet Terry Lennox because he appears at Marlowe's door and wants a lift, basically. In the book, we meet Terry Lennox a couple of times, and Marlowe kind of like he's a friend, like you know, an acquaintance who he has a drink with every now and then. And we kind of get to know a bit about the character, a bit about how he was injured during the war. How
this is in the book.
In the book, how he and his wife kind of like split up and get back together, and split up and get back together. The wife's rich, which is a big plot in the book, which they just get rid of in this film. And the wife's dad and sister are involved, like as you know, characters trying to cover up why she was murdered and things like that. It's more complex. And then they tie it in with, rather than him just having a vague and unexplained affair with Mrs. Wade, who I'm sure has a first name, but this movie couldn't care less, so why should I? There's like Lennox before the war was married to Mrs. Wade, and they're both English.
Who's Mrs.
Right.
Wade?
The woman who's married to the writer, Mr. Wade.
Right. Okay.
The main woman in this movie, Mrs. Wade.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
in the book,
yeah.
they're married, and then he basically has a new identity after the war because of reasons. And the whole plot, the inciting part of the plot, is that she finds out who he is because they have a similar social circle, right? And that's the inciting thing in the book, right? Which I get is really hard to put in a movie, obviously, because you literally don't understand what I'm talking about, and I'm saying it right now to you, to your face.
Well, I think
I would argue that in the movie they don't really have like, I don't think they nail or particularly bother with any relationship.
Let me
there.
tell you my perspective then, because of someone who's not read any, I have no idea, never heard of this before.
Any books ever?
No, lots of books, but not neo-noir, not noir books from the 30s. I will absolutely
50s,
fess to that.
about the 30s.
Sorry. So I think you have to, and I'm not suggesting you're doing this, but you have to detach the book from the source material
Absolutely.
from what's
Absolutely.
on screen. And I think fundamentally my issue is that they don't really lean into any of these elements. They don't really kind of pick one of them to be the main plot, the main story, the main element, or even really what the kind of emotional focus is going to be. And that's because I think Elliot Gould's character is pretty underwritten, which seems a strange thing. For me, he felt like he wasn't really there. He was kind of floating above, and maybe that's an intentional choice because they're trying to satirize the type of character that this is, in that he doesn't really give a shit about the situations he's in. Even when he's beaten up, he's not particularly shocked. Even when that woman gets horribly mutilated, like none of it's landing through his perspective. And if you're telling a story like this, so much of it is about the perspective of the protagonist, because they're the ones who we're going to channel all this through, and they're going to be the golden thread. To be honest, I think Elliot Gould's character could not be in the movie, and it wouldn't change very much. We could just watch these scenes. The confusion about who Terry Lennox is and who is this? They keep talking about him, and I don't even remember who he is. And it's like, oh, it's the guy at the start, and right, so we see him for like 5 minutes, but there's no connection.
So from a pure movie making perspective, I would call that a failure. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're pussyfooting around this, where if this movie had 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, we'd be absolutely raking it over the coals. But because it's got 95%, because film nerds are film nerds, and 40 years after this movie was made, someone fucking went online and wrote, several people wrote really good reviews for it, which is kind of a bullshit metric. And I don't think we've hit this really hard in the past. Rotten Tomatoes, for movies that were made before Rotten Tomatoes existed, our scores are absolute bullshit.
Yeah,
because
totally
they're
wild.
either not rated or 100%. There is really, really not a lot of in between there.
Nobody's rating obscure 1970s, shite house music
unless they really
movies.
like it.
Unless they like it, exactly.
Now, contemporary reviews were quite good generally, so that's maybe a better metric. But for me, from a pure movie making perspective, right, you're right. The movie does not convey properly, visually or through exposition, how important Terry Lennox is. Because, number one, they do not tell you enough about this character. We see him once. I think Elliot might say Terry once in that scene. And the rest is kind of like told to us by other characters in passing in the rest of the movie, while still having all those noiry things where no one really actually imparts any information in almost any conversation in this movie.
Yeah.
And so it leads to quite a frustrating watch where you're kind of like playing catch up of like Elliot Gould's doing the same thing because he has no fucking clue what's going on either. Where we're kind of watching Elliot Gould stumble from scene to scene, almost asleep, and I'm sure that was the direction is, it's sleepy Philip Marlowe.
Yeah.
But none of it feels earned.
But that's sometimes an important film device, isn't it? Is that the audience is working a lot or at the same information level as the protagonist. So we see that sometimes, and it's really effective because you kind of want the audience to be just right on the cusp of understanding what's going on and not leaning any further into that. But I think the problem is that you need to set up the stakes and you need to set up almost the ground rules for that. And I think some of that has to come through your main character because you need them to care. You need them to have an emotional connection to Terry. He drops off this generic looking 1970s man at the airport, and there are thousands of I struggled from that point on. And I think when you then are describing from the book the interconnection that is supposed to be there, or at least is there tacitly and maybe not explicitly in the film, it all actually makes a lot more sense when you point it out. But because it's relying on that real, like, oh, you've read the book, or even if you haven't read the book, you still kind of know what's going on, and that I think I struggled very severely with.
And another big factor as well, and the movie doesn't. Voiceovers are never a good idea generally, except when they are. But the books are kind of told from Philip Marlowe's perspective, and he's telling a story. He's recounting events that have already taken place. If that makes sense, if you try and put it in the framework of how you've read fiction books in the past, I know it's not your jam generally. So. And I know that would make this a really hammy and shitty movie if it was like, hey, I once knew this guy called Terry Lennox, and this is how the story goes. I get that that's a poor way to make a movie also, but you kind of need to find a way instead of that, because that's what the book succeeds at, is kind of having this be like, this is what happened.
Well, we can
tense.
We can do it.
In the movie, I think you need to visually get that across. You need to visually tell me. So we always sometimes say cut act one, but I think the first act of this movie should be we meet Terry. So Philip Marlowe is working on a case, probably like, let's just have a really boring case. He's trying to catch someone who's cheating on their wife, right? So he's driving around town taking photos, and he keeps bumping into this guy called Terry. They strike up a rapport. They become friends. Marlowe solves the case. He gets paid. He goes home. He gets shit-faced. We can have the stupid, weird cat scene. We can have all of that.
God.
Right? No, save it, Sam. Hold your water. We can have all of that. And then Terry comes in. Just have 10 minutes of movie like that, and then suddenly we know who Terry is. We know who Philip Marlowe is. We know how he works, how he gets things done, and it kind of like then we can go into the rest of this movie maybe with some expectations And I would argue you wouldn't need to change a lot else. We can go into this movie with some expectations, and maybe we aren't rooting for Marlowe, but we kind of maybe understand a little bit more about the character, which we just don't get in here.
We would have that relationship, wouldn't we, between Terry and Philip? We would understand that they've got some kind of connection, and so when then the movie proceeds, and wild goose chase round 1970s Hollywood looking for. Who knows? At least we've got a reason for that to happen. And when we get sidetracked into this Ernest Hemingway writer dude and the gangster side plot, that episode in the miniseries, we have a central thread that runs through that he's trying to find his friend. And the reason that he's trying to find his friend is XYZ. I want to go back to a point you made earlier about this being 95% Rotten Tomatoes and that influencing, I think, because I do feel I can't help but have a little bit of imposter syndrome and say, am I missing something? Am I a total fucking idiot that I just couldn't connect?
You know what, though, Sam? Fuck that. Because we say this a lot, like, yes, Rotten Tomatoes is generally a good jumping off point for, like, is this movie good? Is this movie not good? I would say it's right more than it's wrong. But sometimes a movie just doesn't hit for you. This movie came out, 50 years ago? Yeah. 51 years ago. Right? And so it's totally reasonable to watch this movie. And we've got track record, Sam. We love plenty of old movies. Tons of old movies. Yeah. And the fact that this didn't hit either of us, I think is kind of proof that it is quite flawed.
And I think there's probably something there about the analytical understanding of that view. Then that's what I want to get to, is like, why? Like, this didn't connect for me, and there might just be the why might just be that it emotionally didn't land. But I think there are also structural issues that come to the fore.
The structural issues, I think, are the basis of why this doesn't hit the not stereotypical, but the standard movie, like. And I'm not saying all movies that follow a 3-act structure and have all the important story beats are good, but it doesn't, because it eschews the standard makeup of a movie that we would say today. Like, there's a Marvel movie, for example, and again, they're not all good. In fact, most of them aren't. But the recognizable format of a movie, right? Because this kind of takes that and quite intentionally, I think, says, nah, you're not getting it. Rip that up, get rid of it. And so, likable characters, understandable motivations, satisfying resolution to anything in this movie. We very intentionally, I think, this movie kind of takes that and throws it out, like, because it doesn't want to do that. And I think you strip all of that away, and then it really is just a 50-50 knife edge of, like, is this movie going to hit you? Are you just going to be there for watching them drive around and do these things, and Gould's kind of idiosyncratic performance? And that's vibes. And if the vibes don't hit, there's kind of not much else here.
Well, let me tell you something else that doesn't hit, that tips your 50-50 balance to more like 40-60 is, like, I think some of the dialogue in this is, number one, barely audible, which is a real problem. I watched this, I ended up putting headphones on just to try and correctly interpret what they were saying. But also, I think some of it's pretty incomprehensible as well. Like, we're very much kind of in that mumbly 70s mode, aren't we? Where
I think part of that. And I don't
2 seconds. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. I think it's something about the kind of the realist 1970s interpretation where we're moving away from, hey, sweetheart, and we're even moving away from very 1960s kind of script writing, which is quite paced and maybe still a little bit stagey, into something that is probably we would see the benefit of in the 1990s, perhaps, with the type of kind of more realistic dialogue. But this is totally, a no man's land.
I will say, this movie looks like shit. And qualifier, the cut of this movie that we watched on Freevee on Amazon was, I think, one of the worst transfers I've seen on an actual streaming service. I've watched movies in full on YouTube that were better quality than this,
which is pretty mad when you like, consider
especially the scenes that take place at night, which is the majority of this movie.
Yeah.
Really bad. It's a really bad transfer, and I believe there is a 4K version of this. I'm not gonna fucking pay 15 quid or.
There's a Blu-ray somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, but that may be part of it. In that, if I could appreciate this in all of its original glory, rather than a reel someone found 30 years after it was made and fucking ran through a fucking reel to computer,
a VHS
device,
to DVD
a USB
converter.
device that fucking converts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I've got it. Rather than this film reel that was converted to VHS, aired on TV, re-recorded to VHS, and then that was converted to the digital stream.
Except the TV, like the moon landings, was a camera pointing at a TV, and then they put that onto the final Amazon.
Exactly, it's a picture of a picture.
Yeah.
But I think part of it's that it's quite hard to see what's going on in a lot of the scenes, so it's quite hard to appreciate. Like Altman's is a good director generally, like he makes good films. The cinematography I thought was really reasonably good, like not maybe stand out, but I think aside from that, to agree with your point about that, what it looks and what it sounds like, I think because it's trying to mash up that it's 1930s source material and this noiry sort of like way of speaking, it's trying to mash that up with, like you said, that 1970s realism of we're going to have real conversations, and in most real conversations it's not expositional, right? I'm not like, oh bro, pass me that thing that our estranged father left us, that we need to go and do this job. Like, do you know what I mean? That you'd maybe
hey bro, I'll do that, but let's also talk about how the fact that you and I have never had a decent conversation, and so we need to really establish our own relationship, bro.
Exactly. That you maybe would have got like 20 years later or 20 years earlier, you maybe would have got like a bit more of a ham-fisted kind of, we just need to get information out, so we're going to have a character come in and dish information. So you've got that thing in this movie where almost nobody is telling you anything relevant, so you're expected to infer almost everything from, in a retrospective way of kind of applying the scene you're watching to the scenes you've already watched to try
that just happened, yeah.
to try and piece together what the fuck's going on. And the idea of that isn't horrible, but I think the execution is, for various reasons.
Who has the time?
I just think, like, again, this is a film that made me feel quite stupid. You said earlier, like, and I'm looking at it's 95%, and usually I'm like, oh, well, I'm obviously being a moron. I'll be engaged. I'll watch it more attentively. I'm watching, and no, it just doesn't. It doesn't quite connect. There's this disconnect, and God damn it, I shouldn't feel stupid because I don't agree with the internet about this.
Exactly. Let's talk about what's in. Let's. I think we've hit the nail on the head. Let's
talk about Elliot Gould.
Let's talk about Elliot Gould. This is a weird performance for me. I've kind of touched on it already.
Top 10 movie dad? Top 10 TV dad?
Well, he's actually not that good a dad in Friends, to be fair, is he?
He's fairly supportive-ish.
No, I don't think he is. He's
Ross,
always
the son?
He's to the eldest son, 100%. And as the eldest son, I approve of this message. No, I think there is something about his performance here which is it's kind of interesting. I'm kind of compelled by it. I'm kind of also slightly frustrated. And if I was the director, I'd be asking, and obviously this was the direction, but asking him for, Elliot, I'd like to just take the fucking smirk off your face for 5 seconds, please. Like, we do not need to be so lackadaisical throughout all of your scenes. Can we maybe just get a little bit more of the core emotion that we're feeling here? Because I think we need to ground it, and that is my frustration.
He's a slob, which is fine. I think, like, that can be
the
a bit
cat
funny
food
and a bit
the goddamn cat food. He's using his hands.
The cat food thing is one of the most disgusting set pieces in film history.
He puts his hands inside the cat food tin to scoop it out, to put it into another tin because his cat knows the difference, and he wants to buy. At the very least,
you'd cut your fucking hand.
Just use a fork, or just fucking get rid of this cat, man. Like, nothing's
and
worth.
And the spatula he's using is way too, but it's a weird scene, and I found it quite Like,
this is the opening scene.
we
of the
can
movie,
watch
by the way.
someone get their head sawn off in a movie, and if it's done well, like it's not. It's like,
Cat
oh, cool.
food.
Like this cat food scene was like, Altman, are you trying to like put me off? You should have put me in a mood, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch.
I'm not going to watch this movie anymore because, this is the opening. Gambit.
It's like
this
Giovanni Ribisi making Nicolas Cage breakfast in Gone in 60 Seconds. It's that disgusting.
Well, let's go to another gangster movie. It's the start of Goodfellas where they're stabbing the shit out of the guy in the boot, and with the noises and everything. It's like, you know what, viewer? If you can't handle this, turn it off. Turn it off because it's only going to get worse. And I think the cat food thing kind of, if you can't handle the cat, the weird ramblingness of this movie is also going to put you off putting as well. It's going to be
Do you reckon this movie actively has given Elliot Gould lung cancer? Must have done.
I mean, I think just hanging around the set would have been bad enough.
So
okay, finish
his
on Gould.
performance, he's slobby and he kind of like, and he's not competent, which is an interesting thing for a private detective.
As a character,
At no point
yeah.
is he particular. Like he's following people around and kind of like slips in past some guards, but at no point does it seem like he really knows what's going on.
He doesn't figure it out, does he? He doesn't
And
figure
he doesn't
out
have
the
a
thing.
satisfying emotional arc. I'd read something that said, in fact, it's on Wikipedia. I'm not going to make out like I got it from some scholarly journal. The film has been called a study of a moral and decent man cast adrift in a selfish, self-obsessed society where lives can be thrown away without backward glance, and any notions of friendship and loyalty are meaningless. I'm like, did we watch different fucking movies?
What?
Like, at no point, this movie does not at any point give me any indication that this Philip Marlowe is a moral or decent man. At any point.
I mean, maybe 70s morality, but I don't know, man.
He's not actively participating in abusing women?
Well, which is another thing that this movie is quite interesting, isn't it?
But I don't get that. And then the ending, the last thing on Gould, I think, that he's incompetent throughout the movie and kind of like, you find yourself asking, is he just following like a script? The script says I've got to be here to solve the mystery, and so I'm here to solve the mystery. And then he finds Lennox at the end and he kills him. And I'm like, so not only have you failed to kind of like set up any moral alignment
why
for
did
this
he kill him?
character, I guess because they thought in the book he doesn't kill him. In the book, this is the last time I'll mention the book.
Please, you fucking
in the
nerd,
book,
enough.
him and Terry Lennox meet at the end, right? Terry Lennox did murder his wife. He's had loads of plastic surgery to hide who he is. He meets Marlowe basically to apologise for like pissing him around basically, and Marlowe essentially hears him out and says, you know, listen, as far as I'm concerned, Terry Lennox died, you know, a month ago or whatever, and Lennox leaves. And then the very last line in the book, last line in the book is, and part of me really wanted him to come back, but I never saw him again. And that's the end. And that would have been cool if he just turned around at the end of the movie and gone like, you know, you're a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit. Like, what have I been doing this whole time? And left. But he murders him. And this is a character, Elliot Gould,
for no reason that
he's
been looking for.
We don't see him be particularly. He doesn't have tons of agency in terms of like he's not shooting people. He's not like capping people.
No, and also the wife, Terry Lennox's wife, that is killed. Do we see her?
Nope. Off
right.
screen.
So we don't have any connection with Elliot Gould's character and the wife who's been murdered for him to say, how could you do that to her? He doesn't give a shit. He's not doing it he's doing it because he went to war with this guy and we spent 2 minutes with him at the start of the movie. Like that's, so again, it's such a frustrating portrayal because
it's tonally a bit all over the shop.
There's something
because we also don't really know, like, he's hanging around the Wades and
these
part
characters,
of it, and we have the outburst, don't we, after Mr. Wade kills himself. I'm sure these people have first names, but who could give a shit? Ernest Wade. He must Ernest
Hemingway, basically. Yeah.
Heming Wade.
Hemingway. Well done.
He tried to wade in this movie and he drowned. Poor fuck.
Yeah.
And so he's there, and like he's trying to prove that his friend didn't commit this murder. Kind of. At times, he's trying to prove that. And he has this massive outburst about, oh, he's dead, and he was, he was doing this, he was doing that, and at this point I'm like, but that happened 40 minutes ago, and you mentioned it in one line. How am I supposed to still possibly care about this murder that happened off screen?
No. And all the while the film doesn't really go there.
Oh, he's trying to fuck the wife.
He's trying to clearly have sex with the wife. This cartoonish writer character I really disliked because I just
Eileen and Roger Wade, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I've
said it once.
You people are awful people. You need to go jump in the sea. Hey, you did it. And there's something to there, like, so what's the purpose of this character in this story then? And the purpose, clearly, I don't know, is for Elliot Gould to get some tail. But the film doesn't even go there, really. The writer,
the book
character,
does. This is the crazy thing, Sam. I know I said I wouldn't mention the book again, and that was a lie. Obviously, it was a lie.
For goodness' sake.
No, what I'm saying was, Sam, that they chose not to have that in the movie. They made a deliberate choice.
So in the movie, they're together. They get
and
together.
Throw it away. No, in the book, they kind of have this
like
attraction,
well,
and it's complicated. Yeah. But she basically honeypots him a little bit to try and make the husband think that he fucked her.
Yeah, because they've got kind of weird dynamic there. And
then she kills him. Not Marlo, but the husband. And it's kind of like we take all of that out of the movie. And I agree, it's weighty and it's a lot, and it's maybe too much for the movie.
No,
but you don't put anything else back in. So Marlo's just kind of hanging around for reasons.
But because Elliot Gould's character is underdeveloped and doesn't connect emotionally with the scenes. If he had his horn dog on, going for it, fine. But he's not interested in it, really. He's just kind of floating around. Baffling. Totally baffling. Other things that are baffling in this movie. These naked women.
Sam, why do you have to hate everything good in life?
Listen, this is...
That was a joke, audience.
No, but let's be clear. Let's be clear. If we're going to have, we enjoy random nudity as much as the next person, and we've just done a whole rewatch of 80s movies where, in kids' movies, we get breasts for no reason. Like,
for the dads,
fine.
Sam. It's for the dads.
But honest to God, you've got to make it go somewhere. Like these women have a very, very small kind of plot purpose in terms of. But
what's the plot purpose?
Isn't there some connection to the police when the police come like that? They were too baked, so they didn't see anything. Like, but I'm really on a thread here.
No. There's no reason. Isn't a plot thing. If you were being really generous, you could say that they're there to kind of like lend themselves, or their tits, to establishing the tone of the maybe more sexually liberated 70s, perhaps. And they're definitely coded as hippies, I think.
Yeah, with the 100%. But why? But why? Other than you just wanted to have them in the movie.
I agree, Sam. But why is because it genuinely feels like studio notes these days are like, oh, we need to. There needs to be a love, a romantic plot, but absolutely no touching. And that in the 70s they were like, oh, I like this, but is there any way we can have 18 sets of tits in the movie? I don't mind how you split that up. It doesn't have to be pairs. I need to see 18 female nipples in this movie throughout the runtime. And if it's a 100-minute movie, it needs to be 20. It feels like that because
there's no other reason.
May as well not have names. They literally exist to be like, hey,
to be ogled at.
Women exist and they've got tits. Yeah. Have you heard about it? And I'm like, yeah. What are we doing?
I guess it's the type of
they don't provide.
Dave.
I don't know if there was a cut scene where these girls give Gould some information that he needs, and then
just something. Just give him something to do.
We keep coming back to these girls who are always stood outside their apartment on. It's not a balcony; it's a walkway outside the apartment.
It's not even a balcony. They couldn't even afford a balcony.
Doing Pilates on the balcony. These 5 or 6 women who live in this tiny apartment.
Other baffling
choice,
choices.
man.
One more baffling choice for you, and then we can get to the final pièce de résistance of this film. There's a scene where they're in Tijuana or something, or wherever the hell they're supposed to be, and they're in the marketplace.
Mexico, south of the border, down Mexico way.
So they're all doing, and we get this kind of this outdoor shot, and then there's some dogs hanging around, and then the camera pans in and zooms closer to the dogs as one dog mounts the other dog, and then we get just the longest shot of these dogs fucking, and I'm like,
what are we doing?
What? Do you have... So you shot that fine. If that was me in the moment, yes, I'm a camera. I'm 100% going to zoom in on that. And then what I'm going to do...
So it reminds me of it. It's
say,
like, you know, in American
hey,
Beauty,
look at
when
this.
he's filming the bag blowing in the wind. It's like that, except, it's just too much. Yeah, man, it's going to be a real trip. People won't know what to do. Oh, my God. And I'm like, why?
Why?
No?
What does...
What's that adding to the plot, the theme...
And if you tell me, film critics, this is a satire of this is subversive, oh man, get fucked. Like, if you're going to have this in a movie, make it mean something. Give us some kind of narrative. Give us some kind of thematic element. Give us some. Even if you want to go zany and just say we're going to have some random shit that just shows up every now and again, and that's going to be interesting. Otherwise, what are you doing? This needs to be edited out of the movie because it is. I'm baffled. I'm baffled all the way through, and this is peak bafflement.
It's a weird sort of situation.
The violence
do you know what
in
baffled
this...
me, Sam? Do you know what baffled me?
Go on.
The gangster.
The gangster. I was just about to get that. The whole point of this.
Who's not connected to anyone else in this movie.
So Terry owes this guy money, and so the gangster's coming after Elliot Gould because he's like in the PI gangsterish arena.
Well, because he knows Elliot Gould was arrested in connection with it, so he knows because the cops are bent. He knows that Marlowe knows
there's some kind of connection there.
And Terry steals 350 grand from him. And the most confusing part of the movie, Sam, is that Terry Lennox is living it up somewhere, right, in this King spa. He gives the money back. So what did you even get out of faking your own death? I don't quite understand.
It's so stupid. But this gangster character is he's unhinged and he's trying to be scary and everything. And I mean, it was effective enough. I did think it was quite. It was very shocking when he smashed his girlfriend in the face with that bottle. I mean, that is
the weird shot. I thought the shot composition was odd, and they're obviously cutting away from the fact that
this woman hasn't been disfigured.
Yeah.
But it's a. I did find it slightly troubling in that the whole purpose of that, it was to show how much of a badass this guy is and how he's not to be messed with. And I'm kind of bored of that trope. I'm kind of bored of, we're just going to fuck a woman up because we need to advance the story somehow, or we need to make a point, and so we're going to use this female character as like this. We're going to use violence against women as a narrative device because it's the 70s and
lazy.
How else are we going to tell?
It's literally in the movie. This character is in the movie, and this scene is in the movie to tell us how evil this guy was, and it's lazy. It's just
like give us a bit more,
with this guy's unhinged. Maybe he cuts somebody. Maybe it doesn't have to be a woman you've inserted into this movie to get bottled to prove how evil this guy is.
Yeah, and this is what I do to people I love, and I don't even like you. I'm like, dude. The problem is it doesn't. You're not going to do anything to Elliot Gould, are you? And that's the failure, because if the point is that he will
even make Elliot Gould take his shirt off.
No, he will disfigure this girl that he's going out with, and it's very violent and whatever. Then you need to follow through, surely, and you need to do something to Elliot Gould to. Otherwise, you're undermining your own point. You're undermining the point you're making
when they cut. Jack Nicholson's nose.
Yeah.
great scene, right? And implies threat. We know these guys aren't fucking around. Like, that's what I kept coming back to watching this movie, is that Chinatown's really, really good, and this is kind of like the antithesis of that. And the gangster, because the gangster plot also exists in a bottle where I watched this, I've read the plot, I still don't quite know how it actually like connects with the rest
or
of the
why
movie.
it should, or why it
should, because it just kind of resolves itself off screen. We have the weird scene with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Strange.
You absolutely have some artistry, build up to it. For goodness sake, Arnold Schwarzenegger's in this movie, ladies and gentlemen, and
So
Dave,
we have,
you just
so we
blew
have,
it.
We have all these vaguely Italian-American looking gangsters, right? They're all skinny, a bit chubby, right? They're all 45 years old. And then we have Arnold Schwarzenegger at the absolute height of steroid use, I should say. Like, he is fucking inflated. Someone got the bike pump out before the shot. And his pecs are dancing as it's shooting. What's the direction there? Arnold, could you just, like, move your pecs around in the background of the shot?
Do it.
Just to make sure absolutely nobody is listening to what these people are saying.
So when we were watching this, I was slightly ahead of you, and I said, wow, or something to that effect. And you're asking, what is it? I'm like, I'm just watching it. And you're like, you're not going to give me any more than that. I'm like, you don't need it. If you watch this movie and don't notice this, you're an idiot. And then he takes his clothes off, because it is just like, there's Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then they have an entire scene where, for some reason, the gangsters making everyone take their clothes off. I don't know. And Arnie's sitting there in his pants, absolutely just, as you say, steroid up, total beefcake. It's a weird thing, and I think only because obviously the star that he would become makes it weirder.
I think even if he'd never gone anywhere, I think we'd still be looking at it and going, and what's with this bodybuilder in this shot? Like, because he's just centre frame in the shot. Obviously, he knew somebody involved in this production.
Obvious German, Austrian-looking dude. What's he doing? What's happening? I want to know more about him. Like what's going on? Because they don't even get to
that scene, which I don't think the scene's bad. Apart Arnold Schwarzenegger aside, and that's a ride, man. And I'm distracted entirely from what's going on. I don't find this guy scary at all, because I'm watching this German bodybuilder do the pec dance in the background of the shot.
Yeah. And he doesn't do anything either. It's not like he even hurts
which
anyone.
Which is the worst thing, because it's like, he just takes his clothes off.
This is impotent. Yeah.
And then you're like, oh yeah, he's got a knife out, he's going to cut Elliot Gould, they're all taking their clothes off. This is getting a bit weird. Is this where this movie kind of like takes a turn into being like a Taxi Driver-esque kind of like psychotic turn where we don't know what's real? Okay, cool. Oh, sorry, there's a knock at the door. Sir, we've got your big bag full of money. Oh, you can go now because I've got my bag full of money back. Bye, film's over. And I'm sat there thinking, and what am I supposed to have learnt from this? What am I supposed to have gleaned from this entire fucking plot? Is like, and it's over.
Yeah.
And it's not even about the futility of Elliot Gould doing anything, because he's not fucking doing anything.
It's a staggering mess, really. It's a staggering mess. And maybe that's the point, and maybe you were supposed to not know what's going on.
In 2021, the Library of Congress selected this film for preservation in the United States National Film Registry as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant.
And if you're... Yeah, I often think about the audience who are downloading this podcast, and thank you very much if you've done so. And you're probably thinking, if you've made it this far, an hour in of us moaning about a film you love, because if you download the episode, probably you've seen it, and probably you like that movie. I would love to have a take,
and I say this every time, I would love to have a take, imaginarymoviepodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah.
I would love to have a take from an actual human person who's watched this, who's under
who likes this movie,
because I'm sure we're wrong. Not wrong exactly, but like, it's fine to like a movie and it's fine to not like a movie. And it's an odd one actually, because I really would have guessed on paper, I would have guessed that I would have loved this and you would have hated it. Like, because it really is on that line, and for us both to dislike it.
Yeah, I think that is a.
And not hate it, I should say. I didn't hate this movie. I was just like,
It's frustration. I'll be honest. There were a couple of times where I was bored. There, not for the whole movie, but enough to be like, "Come on!" And I think it's frustration. That's the overriding feeling for me, is that I don't understand what you're trying to say to me, film, and I find that very unsatisfying from the point of view as a passive audience member who's just going to the cinema watching a movie, but also from doing a podcast and having to analyze and think about and understand why don't I like this? What are you doing wrong, movie? What is it that isn't connecting? And I still don't necessarily, even after an hour talking about it, fully understand. I think, to be honest, you probably need to rewatch it. And I think maybe on rewatch it becomes more interesting, which would explain why some of these more contemporary reviews are a bit high.
And I might from purely an academic point of view, because I watched this and I just watched it on evening, and maybe if I sat and watched it and I was looking out for the things that, but that's not, on the face of it, this podcast isn't an academic review of movies. It's kind of like it's a vibes podcast. And,
we want to provide analysis, but we're not here.
An enjoyable time to watch a movie. We just did our 1984. I assume it'll be out before this episode. We just did our 1984 movie extravaganza, and I fucking love movies. I will slop up so many bad movies. You will be disgusted. It will be more disgusting than Elliot Gould by hand pulling cat food out of a tin and putting in another tin for his picky cat. It's more disgusting than that. I fucking love movies, and for me, I don't want to be frustrated. I don't want to be vaguely bored. I don't want to be thinking like, what are you trying to tell me, movie? Like, it's fine to make me work for that, but don't have it be so hard to find that I'm sat there, I'm the woman in the reception, and you've just walked in and said, "Hey, doll, you want to walk a cabbage down the street or what?" And I'm sat there going, "The fuck is this guy talking about?
What's happening? Who are you, sir? Who are you?"
You can't smoke in here. It's 2024.
Yeah. Please, why have you got a tin of cat food? And what are you doing with your hands? Please get your disgusting hands
We should
off.
add, by the way, for when we eventually do our sketch comedy hour, we should add our private detective in 2024 walking into like a car rental place and talking to the receptionist to the list. I think that's got just the tiniest little bit of rope. I think that could be amusing.
It could be amusing. I think it's definitely something for us to workshop, and I think we have to integrate some kind of cat food related thing, because Dave, this has gone into my soul. I am a private detective walking around with cat food covered fingers, talking about.
This guy isn't washing.
It's the 30s, man. The lead is everywhere. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Cat food's everywhere, man.
Jesus Christ. Well, listen, listener, thank you for listening, and thank you for getting through an hour of us trashing a movie that perhaps
thank you,
enjoyed.
Sam, for somehow getting through that sentence.
Oh,
We'll see you next week. So, doll, have you seen the weather?
So this is a supermarket. Can I help you?
It's the Bond thing.
Meow.